The Life Sciences DNA podcast is sponsored by Agilicium Labs, a collaborative space where Agilicium works with its clients to co-develop and incubate POCs, products, and solutions. To learn how Agilicium Labs can use the power of its generative AI for life sciences analytics, visit them at labs.agilicium.com. Sri, we've got Karthik Raman on the show today. Who is Karthik?
Karthik Raman is the CEO and co-founder of Persist AI, a company pioneering the use of AI and robotics to accelerate drug formulation development for pharmaceutical manufacturers. He has more than a decade of experience spanning drug delivery, automation, and machine learning. Previously, he held roles including Senior Product Manager of Automation at Zymergen and founder of Papyrus Bio. He holds a doctorate in bioengineering from the University of Utah, where his research focused on sustained drug delivery to the brain.
And what is Persist AI?
Persist AI specializes in accelerating pharmaceutical formulation development by integrating AI, robotics, and cloud technologies. Its main product is a cloud-based robotic lab and an AI-driven experimentation platform, which allows scientists and pharmaceutical companies to remotely design, execute, and analyze high-throughput drug formulation experiments. The system dramatically cuts the time, cost, and material requirements traditionally involved, reducing processes that once took years to months.
And what are you hoping to hear from him today?
Danny, it's a very interesting proposition. The lab automation work is heavily human, and I'm really looking forward to hearing Karthik's perspective on how you are bringing digitization and automation to a heavily human-related lab setup.
Well, before we begin, I want to remind our audience that they can stay up on the latest episodes of Life Sciences DNA by hitting the subscribe button. If you enjoy the content, be sure to hit the like button and let us know your thoughts in the comments section. And don't forget to listen to us on the go by downloading our own audio-only version of the show from your preferred podcast platform. With that, let's welcome Karthik to the show.
Hi, Karthik. Welcome to Life Sciences DNA. It's great to have you here. Karthik, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background and what you're doing right now?
Thanks for having me, Sri. It's so nice to see you. My background's in pharmaceutics. Did my PhD at University of Utah. My first role was in Recursion as a machine learning software engineer. And then, throughout my career, we've gone from there into a little bit of sales at Bio-Rad, a little bit of med device at a company called Penumbra. And then finally, I went into robotics at a company called Zymergen. They later got acquired by Ginkgo Bioworks. So now, we started a company that's doing AI and robotics for formulation, which you can see how it all comes together.
Karthik, why don't we jump right in? It seems like a really a great space to be in where you're applying AI to really a lab space. So tell me, what was the situation before? How was this work being done? And then how does robotics automation start to be applied in this area?
The conventional way of doing all this work, which I used to do for a long time, was all manual, right? You'd have a group of scientists that are in the lab. They first say, okay, I need to work on this formulation. I have a gut feeling of roughly what will work. And so we'll make a small set of experiments. We'll physically mix together our formulation. We'll physically then characterize it on the classical equipment that exists out there. And then all the data, you get it manually. Then you make a spreadsheet out of it, right? Then you make a report out of it. And none of this is templated. None of this is automated. It's all fully manual. That's the classical method of doing all this work. Now, more and more, of course, the larger pharma companies are investing in automation. But I think automation in formulation is limited. It's much more applied towards the drug discovery side. So a lot of the plate-based cell culture kind of work. Once you get into making particles, as an example, not automated, right? It's a manual piece of equipment that you have to run. So that's what we've been changing on our end. We've been taking either taking classical equipment and then putting it together, like integrating it, modifying it, making a lot of custom parts. Or in some cases, we just say, you know what, forget the classical equipment. we're just going to do it on our own. And we're going to make a new piece of equipment that does the same thing as the original. Maybe it gathers the same kind of information. And then it does it in higher throughput, and it's robotically actuated, right? Rather than a human doing all this work.
So that's wonderful. So you're automating some of the human work efforts, but it requires the humans do this lab work because of precision, of their ability to really look at things in a much more small, granular manner and make some discerning, observations. So how have you been able to replicate that all through automation? Walk me through the process of what does it take to build this, and how do you go about implementing this?
Everything will start with a subject matter expert. So the human is not going anywhere, right? They still have to be the ones that help us determine how to make the automation. So step one is let's do it manually. Any new process, let's do it manually. Then you say, okay, what are the pieces that are more amenable to automation? And what are the pieces that are not that amenable? Let's start with those, right? So shrink down the problem. And then within those pieces that are amenable, is it something that we can just apply conventional automation tools to, like just a robotic arm? Is that sufficient? Or is it something a little bit more interesting? Like a lot of the work in formulation is all done in solids. So moving around solids is very hard because some of them are sticky, some of them are electrostatic, so they'll just fly everywhere, right? So how do you control those things? Just the physical, mechanical things, so that your formulation's moving as expected. It's kind of the initial bit. After that, we then get into the actual robotics piece, right? Now we've moved around our materials. How do we run the equipment so that we gather the same characterization kind of data that a normal human workflow would utilize? And how do we capture the non-standard stuff as well? So for example, in some of the workflows that people use for biologics, there's a physical inspection, like a visual inspection of what that vial looks like. And we have to use a camera, right? So first we say, okay, let's just try one camera. Does it work? Maybe. Maybe you detected the same particles that the human did. But the human eye is so amazing that you can detect things that are tiny. You wouldn't have even expected. Like some of the younger folks, they can detect things down to 1 micron, whereas the older folks might not, right? So as you get trained in this work, then you say, oh, maybe I need an even higher resolution camera that can detect the really tiny stuff. That's a lot of what we're doing on the automation piece. It's taking the manual workflow, trying to replicate as much as we can of both the real work that's like very well understood and also the stuff that's less understood, which is how do you do a visual inspection? Like, what are you even looking for? And that's a lot of where we're applying AI.
So let's explore that, right? So a visual inspection is a classic image processing problem, as you said. Looking at it, first is the pixel resolution, then discerning what exactly is in the image you're seeing, and then taking action and then causation of those actions to doing the right thing. So walk me through that. Is this heavy compute, heavy edge AI where everything is there in the image? How are you doing this, and what kind of processing capacity are we talking about here?
For something like this, where it's a pretty simple assay, where you're just taking an image off a vial, maybe you're taking a video of the vial because these are particles, so they might fall slowly and you'll notice the fall. And from that fall, you can kind of determine what's the particle size, or is it a piece of skin, like a little bit of skin cells, or is it something else, right? All of this is happening on the automation, on premise, on the edge. None of this needs to happen in the cloud. The work that we're doing on the cloud is more when you have a ton of compute requirement. So, let's say if you're doing a literature review, there's a ton of papers that you need to then run a RAG kind of search across all of this literature. That's when I would do it on the cloud. But some of this video processing, because these are simpler things, we can actually do it at the edge now.
Wonderful. So you have edge compute algorithms, and this is kind of the next stage stuff, right? Where you're moving the algorithm right to the edge. So what kind of compute capacity are you needing, and how are you pulling together this infrastructure? Is it a heavy capital intensive? Is this a lot of equipment cost to make something which a human can do easily? Sometimes we over engineer what a machine can do because you have to overcompensate versus just putting, as you said, a younger human to just do the work and get it done. So talk to me about the positive. What is the infrastructure, and then what kind of cost per unit are we talking about?
This is such a funny comparison, because the first thing you think of, right, when you're automating is my robot replacing a human? And what's the cost? Like, is there an ROI? How many years does it take? Because you're paying a human a salary, you're not paying the robot a salary. The CapEx is definitely a big piece of what we spend our money on. But a lot of this is about, can we replicate what a human does with a higher quality, right? The human gets tired, the robot maybe doesn't get as tired. And if we can do this, can we free up the human to do more of the thinking work that the robot doesn't need to do, right? The robot can focus on the physical stuff. So in terms of spending, very heavy CapEx spending. The compute spending at the edge isn't so bad. Even regular CPUs these days are pretty decent. And then cloud compute, at least for the kind of work that we're doing with literature reviews, or putting together a lot of papers, doing a RAG across them, there's a heavy upfront fee for tokenization, making the vector database. But then, every time you run the search, it's not that bad. Ends up being on the order of dollars, right, per search. I think a lot of our money gets spent on physical hardware first, and then the cost goes down over time.
No, fair enough. I know it's the classic ROI and replacing the human effort. You're saying about the quality. What kind of quality improvements are you facing? Because as you said, the variation between the expert and the junior was a micron in detection. What does that do in terms of cost? Is the cost of quality 50% of the effort, 20% of the effort, 10%? Because it seems like your ROI is hinged on making that cost of quality much higher. So what is that, and how do you make good, compelling ROI cases for business on that?
Sometimes the cost of quality is infinite, right? So the kind of classical example that we've seen is, let's say that you've got a CDMO that you work with. You're a pharma company, you've got a CDMO partner. You've got this expert that's been in the CDMO that's been doing a lot of your work. And then he either gets sick or he leaves. All that knowledge is gone, right? Now the new person comes in, they can't replicate the old work because maybe there was something very nuanced that they didn't pick up. And so it wasn't written in the SOP. And this happens way more often than you would expect in formulation, because formulation is not just about the ingredients that you put together, but also the process by which you then manipulate those ingredients to make it a particle, to make it a lipid formulation, to make it a micelle, whatever it is. So in that case, right, the making it a robotic platform has infinite ROI, because you go from not being able to replicate it to being able to replicate the work. But in some of the other cases, like a simpler formulation, let's say for monoclonal antibodies, those kind of formulations, it's more about the ingredients, less about the process. So maybe the ROI is much, much smaller, but you can do it in much higher volume. And so then your argument is, with a human, you might have 40 hours a week. With the machine, you might have 160 hours a week, right?
Yeah. So it's fair enough. So you're making a people-based portfolio strategy, right? Some portfolios it fits better, some portfolios it does not. So as you're going into market, the biggest aspect is convincing somebody about this change, right? Because it's a change in financial capex versus opex, change in labor versus non-labor headcount, and then of course comes the change on the reliability of the model. Most people are PhDs and they're like, hey, I trust another PhD from this university, but I don't know you or your equipment. So why do you think that this would be that much better? So Walk me through all of those change management stuff. One is around people and people replacement, and second, of course, is the proof point that this does perform better than what the standard of operating procedure is today.
I think the nice thing about pharma is that we care about quality a lot. And the more auditable a series of steps is, the better it is for us. In GMP manufacturing, right, everything has to be written down in SOP. It needs to be replicated by people who are not experts in the field. And you always have multiple people try to do the same SOP. In R&D, maybe less so, right? It's not as common as the GMP rigor. But when we apply robotics to this work, we can easily show that this work has now got an audit trail behind it, even at R&D. And if you wanted to, you could run the same schedule, as we call it, and then the robots will perform the same action the same way, right? Without any kind of errors in the middle. You get much tighter error bars when you do this work. So I think that's been a pretty easy conversion for clients of ours to be able to say, yes, it makes sense to use robotics to do this. The other piece that I'm noticing is as we grow in our careers, we want to do less and less bench work. We want to do more and more thinking work, right? So we just become experts in our field in that the grunt work of like manipulating things on the bench is maybe not as high ROI for our time. So by saying, let's offload this to the robots and let people do higher ROI work, that's been very easy to tell people about. There's basically no change management. Nobody comes out of their PhD saying, oh, I really wish I could do cell culture for 8 hours a day, right? Or I could do the same formulation assay 8 hours a day. That just sounds terrible. And so by telling them, no, look, now you've got an option. Let the robots do the grunt work. You guys should be creative. This is what humans are very good at. Even AI hasn't gotten to that point yet, right? I think that's a very easy thing to manage in terms of change.
So as you go in, we talked about that there are certain ready-made ROI use cases where high labor work, high complexity robotics works, low complexity, low labor work. It's reasonably. So is there a certain category of customers and or maybe assays or formulations which are kind of the immediate target where the ROI is huge, the needs are higher? Is there a stratification of the marketplace? What is that?
What I'm noticing is there's a ton of new drugs that are coming through. And the types of drugs are getting more complex over time as well, right? We started with small molecules a long time ago. Then we got into peptides. Then we got into biologics. And from monoclonals, it's become multivalent or ADCs, right? More and more complex types of drugs. So the stuff that's old has now become routine. Beautiful things to automate. The stuff that's new still requires a lot of flexibility. Maybe automation is not the right answer yet. It'll become routine over time. And so a part of our job is to then say, okay, what's the line, right? At what point do we say it's routine enough? Let a robot do this work, because we need human brains to work on the more complex stuff that's coming down the pipeline. That's how we stratify our markets. It's oral solids, capsules, even particle kind of formulations, oral suspensions. Those are pretty routine. ADCs, probably a very good thing to onboard onto automation next, because then you can put up walls and you can prevent humans from working on these high potency compounds that can be toxic if you just inhale a microgram of them. But then, some of the more complex stuff that's coming down the pipeline, we have to wait until we automate those.
Yeah, no, this is fantastic. You talked about the change management, talked about how you're bringing in to a particular segment. And as you said, you're automating the old and leaving the innovation to the new. As you start to think about new folks coming in now with robotics happening in those areas, what kind of education do these guys, are they they have to be robotic savvy? Do they need to be understanding formulation? Because to do higher level stuff, many a time the human brain, you have to do the lower level stuff to understand before you can go and do that. So walk me through what do you think about talent today, but what do you think that talent today would be for tomorrow?
What I'm noticing is we're at this transition point, right? So far, we've been doing it manually. We're transitioning to the robotic side. Now, you still need people to do manual work while they're studying, while they're in their PhDs. They become the SMEs while they do that. By the time they get to industry, now a cloud laboratory or robotic lab like us might actually be a tool that they can use. But because they've gotten their hands dirty before, they can now work with this system. Now I think the onus becomes more on, are you good at data analysis, right? What can you deduce based on this set of formulations that you just got data on? Sometimes a drug that is very, very soluble on the bench may not be as bioavailable as something that is less soluble. And that's a gut feel, right? You test it and you say, you know what? I don't think this is going to work as well in an animal. That needs to convert into an AI model over time. And I think that's where most of this work is now shifting. So people who are SMEs coming out of their PhDs start using cloud labs, focus more on data analysis over time. The data analysis then becomes an AI pipeline. So they become almost like workflow orchestrators. And then now they're using a team of agents or AI models to be able to do all their work in an automated fashion. And they're working on the next complex project, right? All of this takes a lot of time to engineer. I think the future is going to be these multi-talented folks. They start off as highly technical in one subject, and then they slowly broaden into learning more AI, statistics, programming, and maybe even a little bit of automation as they grow as the technical people. Or they go up the management track and they learn how do you manage a group of people who are all multi-talented, right?
And a group of people and a group of robots, right? All of these both need to come together.
Yeah.
Let's take we talked about the positive cases of how AI and the edge AI has worked, but there's always the bad actor syndrome. So how do you protect a bad actor from coming in and either tampering with the image or as they say, positively, when everything goes good, AI is perfect, but once something goes wrong, to unwind it and doing it and recalibrate it requires a lot of time and effort. So walk me through, what are the guardrails and safety you have to make sure that these things can recover from errors?
So the good news is we control the entire environment. So imagine that you're using this cloud laboratory in the future, right? It's on Persist to then manage the people running that infrastructure. We become like TSMC almost over time because we are the infrastructure for science or formulation in this case. Now, within our company, only a few people actually work on the hardware. Some of the others might be working on workflows or on software engineering, right? So there's very limited room for tampering with the physical equipment. And especially as you abstract away the physical work from the thinking and people start using these remotely, there should be very few bad actors that are tampering with the data. And all of this is tracked, right, to the second because it's done using these schedulers that you've written to make sure that all the steps that we're doing within the schedule are tracked and you know what went wrong at what time and why. Was it a clog or something else?
Okay. One of the things which everybody is now very concerned about is cyber and the ability for somebody to do either ingestions or AI ingestions into it to tamper with the algorithm. What kind of protections do people have as you start to deploy robots for doing this stuff?
The algorithms that we're using, we first developed them and they're built on the data set that we've gathered within the lab. Everything is, of course, version controlled. It's stored in backups as well as primary containers, let's call it. And then everything is, of course, access controlled. So you can't tamper with the original model. Everything has like a Git repository with forks. So you don't tamper with the old stuff. Every new push that you put into the repository is now version controlled.
Wonderful. So as you start to look through the future, where do you see this going? Right now you're picking up your robotics for those high value use cases. What do you see this? Is this going to be the new norm? Is it going to be in 10% of the cases? Is it going to be in 50%? Well, how do you see the market evolving?
I can totally see a network of cloud laboratories becoming the norm. The trickiest aspect is actually not the robotics or the tampering. It's about IP, right? Every company that uses one of these cloud laboratories will want to have their own contract with the cloud laboratory and say, you know what, my data can't be used by other people, or I don't want my data to be generalized. So I think that's going to be the trickiest piece of all of this. But as robotics is evolving, the ability to automate a lot of these workflows and standardize a lot of the workflows so that data can be compared between organizations or between people, that's becoming so much easier. When we first started this just 3 years ago, not very long, we could buy a robotic arm for about $50,000. Our most recent robotic arm was $10,000. Does the same amount of work, same reliability, right? So the costs of robotics is just coming down like crazy.
And so you see this going to be an adoption, but the critical challenge is going to be the IP on how people manage that. But it should be no different from current labs where people send their samples and labs process it. So hopefully you'll get a similar IP protection. Now, as you're starting to evolve yourself, are you a AI company? Are you a formulation company? Do you have AI people? Do you have formulation scientists? How do you build a company which is domain centric but transforming a domain place like formulation?
Yeah, I think this is the biggest difference between us and like a traditional CRO or CDMO. When you speak with traditional CRO, CDMO, it's 99% are scientists. And maybe you'll have one person who's an IT person, right? Versus for us, we've got a team of 24, 7 scientists. The rest are all hardware, software, AI, ML. And maybe that's just because we're building the infrastructure right now. But I don't see it changing. I think over time, there's going to be so much maintenance work to just make sure that the system runs. You'll still need to have all 3 categories of people. And I think where Persist is going to go is initially we have to build the infrastructure. So build the robotics so that we can gather this very highly controlled data. And then go from that into building models on top of the data that's more predictive than anything else that was ever possible. From there, now we might change, right? We might get acquired, because I could totally see that acquiring company won't want this level of AI models to be given to a competitor. But those are so far in the future, I don't even think about them.
So you have 2 sets of teams, right? The AI team and the formulation or the subject matter experts. How do these teams interact? Because it's like one speaks Chinese and one speaks Russian, and these 2 people have to get together and formulate and build a new product. What kind of culture are you building to get 2 very diverse set of teams to work together?
This is the key for anyone that's growing their career now. You don't get a choice of just doing one thing. So every piece of equipment that we have, like every platform, is managed by a team. And that team includes the subject matter experts, as well as the AI people, as well as the automation people. And every week they have a sprint. They behave like a software team. It's a sprint planning kind of methodology. But it includes a scientist, and science doesn't work on sprints, right? I think more and more the lines are getting blurred between these teams, and you don't get to be just a scientist. If you aren't using AI, you're going to lose to someone who is using AI and has the scientific expertise.
Wonderful. Karthik, this has been a very enlightening session around where innovation and transformation is happening. If you're to summarize and kind of give some key takeaways to the audience, what would that be? What do they have to look forward to, and where is all of this thing evolving and going?
The future is looking super bright, right? The rate at which we can do work such as formulation is going up so high. So the number of formulations per person per hour should go much faster than what it is right now. And that generates this huge amount of data, which then further accelerates the cycle, right? There's this flywheel effect of how quickly we can do science going forward. So I'm super excited because we're on formulation, so we're a little bit downstream. But even upstream, companies like Recursion or Nvidia are doing so much work on drug discovery, and they're pushing a bunch of drugs down the pipeline. So in this future, right, we should be able to identify an interesting drug for a disease very quickly. We should be able to come up with prototypes very quickly. We should be able to go through the whole formulation, stability, all that process incredibly fast. And if the new FDA guidance on trying to avoid animal studies through in silico tools has the effect that they want, we should be able to then get into a first in human without even going through animals, right? It's all predicted. So the future is really bright for pharma. Maybe this is the startup guy in me speaking, but I really believe in like American innovation, the amount of cool stuff that's happening. We're at an inflection, and I think AI is driving a lot of this. Robotics is driving a lot of this.
No, Karthik, that was super. You're automating an area which is the last button, which is the human work in the lab. Usually people have gone about automating intellectual work and other white collar labor. This is a combination of, I wouldn't say blue collar, but hands-on white collar work, which requires experience and expertise and fidelity of a human. And it's really wonderful to see that. So thank you again for being on Life Sciences DNA, and I really appreciate your time today. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Sri. This was great.
Well, that was real interesting to listen to, Sri. What did you think?
I think it's really fascinating. As I said, when you start to take a lab automation setup and then automate it with robotics, you're really taking what I call experienced white collar humans and then putting automation in their hands so that they can then free themselves from doing routine and rote work to much more strategic work. So it's a really interesting part of the drug discovery process and an interesting part to automate.
You did talk about whether robots versus humans and whether robots can actually replicate what humans can do. He talked about pure being able to replicate what a human does with really a higher quality. It's fatigue free. They don't have to worry about how many hours it's been working. What do you think about the role robotics will play in the future of the pharmaceutical companies?
This is really an exciting use of technology. When you take a look at image processing and what you're trying to do, they're taking that image processing capabilities and putting it in the hands of the robots to not alone just process what you see, but also to handle the high fidelity of what you should be doing in the formulation process. So it's really sound engineering, which is then associated with AI and others to really drive automation in what I call a much more traditional labs setup.
You had asked about adoption and resistance to the technology. You talked about pharma caring a lot about quality, which of course we know is true, but that this gives them something that's more auditable, and it ensures that everyone is following the same SOP, and you've got an audit trail. Do you accept that?
The biggest challenge in pharmaceutical services is the human variability. Anything which we can do to make sure that the human variability is standardized through technology is going to be very useful. We're always in a quality first mindset. To ensure high quality, you may need to make sure that the human variability is removed. That goes away from removing fatigue, removing experiential differentiation among humans, and really bringing routine and rote work, which causes fatigue and errors, to a much more higher standard of quality. And so I definitely think that this is the way to go. And more as we start to automate routine and rote work, which requires attention to detail, high quality, but consistency of effort, this is going to make humans do much more thoughtful and creative work.
Well, you said we're at a transition point, but I'm wondering what you think this might mean for the career path of people. What do you think of someone who might come to the workplace with a very specific depth of technical expertise? And what will this mean as they go forward in their careers?
So as we explored in the conversation, somebody coming in will be a PhD who has actually been a bench scientist, who has gone through the mechanisms of really knowing how things work. But if they are not comfortable in adopting an AI assisted model, then they would be left out of the workplace. The workplace will be more and more of the lab of the future with automation and helping bring technology together. And so the kind of people who have to come into the workforce should be able to adopt new technology, be able to work and human assist with the technology to make sure that these things happen in a scalable manner. Those who are very resistant to that are going to be left behind.
Well, it's something that sounds like it's coming a lot faster than a lot of people may anticipate, and it's going to be bringing about big changes, not only in how things get done, but the way people work. So it was a fascinating conversation. And Sri, thanks as always.
Thank you, Danny. Appreciate it. Take care.
Thanks again to our sponsor, Agilisium Labs. Life Sciences DNA is a bi-monthly podcast produced by the Levine Media Group with production support from Fullview Media. Be sure to follow us on your preferred podcast platform. Music for this podcast is provided courtesy of the Jonah Levine Collective. We'd love to hear from you. Pop us a note at danny@levinemediagroup.com. For Life Sciences DNA, I'm Daniel Levine. Thanks for joining us.